A golden cloud of dust billowed behind the wheels of the last stagecoach as it shuddered to a halt, with something like a weary sigh at a small station in a sun-drenched southern town. It was an unremarkable conveyance, blending in with any other, and its arrival scarcely rippled the drowsy calm of the station. Ethan Blackwood, a man of reserved mien who drew no undue attention, alighted onto the dusty ground along with a few other passengers, melting into the small throng of those arriving and departing. His travel attire, a simple duster the color of the earth, as if woven from the road itself, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, bore no bright details, no accents that might catch a curious eye. He was a part of the landscape, a fleeting silhouette against the orange-red sunset bleeding across the prairie sky. His gaze, however, was anything but passive. Shielded by the hat's shadow, Ethan's eyes swept the streets, greedily absorbing every detail, every nuance. He assessed the age and condition of the wooden buildings, the leaning walls, the faded paint, the creak of porch boards. He noted the density and type of horse traffic, observed the manner in which the locals carried themselves, some with open friendliness, others with wary suspicion, and still others with a weary reticence. These were the first, almost imperceptible strokes in the portrait of the place, the initial tiny clues that his heightened senses instantly registered, analyzed, and pieced together into a coherent whole. He even noticed subtleties like the faint cracks in the saloon's foundation, the uneven wear of the boardwalk planks underfoot, the peculiar reddish tint to the dust that coated everything in this arid land, settling on windows, tree leaves, and the clothes of passers-by. He breathed in the air, thick with the scents of dried grass, horse sweat, and food cooking somewhere nearby, searching for anything unusual, anything that broke the pattern. Ethan lingered at the station no longer than any ordinary traveler might, with minimal luggage, a scuffed leather satchel. He made his way quickly to one of the boarding houses. He chose not the one in the town center, always bustling and noisy, but a smaller, quieter establishment on the far edge of town, offering fewer prying eyes and more opportunities for discreet observation. Renting a modest room was a swift transaction, with no undue questions from the elderly landlady, accustomed to taciturn travelers. Introducing himself quietly as Mr. Blackwood, he received a heavy key and ascended the creaking stairs to a small, cleanly kept room. The window looked out onto a backyard, beyond which stretched sparse scrub brush and an empty field rolling toward the horizon. From here, shrouded in shadow and remaining unseen, he could observe and assess a portion of the main street, the comings and goings, without drawing attention to himself. In the evening, by the light of a kerosene lamp, he opened his small field notebook, making initial sketches and notes of his observations. The next day, Ethan began his mapping of the town, employing a carefully crafted cover story. He presented himself as a traveler searching for a distant relative, a plausible tale that required no easily verifiable details, but provided a legitimate reason for inquiries and movement throughout the town. He visited all the key locations where information might be gathered. The Saloon, a hub of rumors, news, and local yarns at any time of day or night, where inebriated patrons willingly shared their thoughts and observations. The general store, where he learned about incoming and outgoing goods, and thus about new faces connected with trade. The local church, a center of moral and social gravity, where the pastor knew much about the lives of his congregation. The livery stable, a nexus of information about transport, arrivals, and transient passengers. Each place yielded its own piece of the mosaic. He didn't just ask questions. He listened. He listened to conversations, picking up names, fragments of stories, the subtleties of local life and relationships. His hearing, far keener than an ordinary man's, could discern quiet whispers through the thin wooden walls of the boarding house and catch snippets of phrases from several dozen yards away, as if people were speaking directly into his ear. His sense of smell, enhanced by his unusual nature, registered uncommon or persistent odors, the faint acrid scent of fear that lingered in the air after a profound fright. Specific, often repellent aromas associated with certain substances or, more importantly, with certain beings distinct from ordinary humans. These scents became invisible threads leading toward his quarry. Thus far, despite all his efforts, he had found no direct signs of his commissioned target, the man he had been hired to find and eliminate. Nothing in the town's rumors or atmosphere pointed directly to a specific individual. However, the overall aura of the town was too calm, almost unnaturally placid, like a taut string ready to snap. Something large and dangerous lurked beneath the surface of this provincial tranquility, meticulously camouflaged as an everyday occurrence. This sensation troubled him, triggering a professional premonition of impending trouble, a trouble that extended beyond the scope of his current mission. His first official contact was a visit to Sheriff Brody. The sheriff's office was housed in a small but neat wooden brick building adjoining a few small, windowless jail cells. Ethan introduced himself as Mr. Blackwood, a private security consultant, using a neutral yet sufficiently weighty title that granted him the right to ask certain questions about goings-on in town without excessive explanation or suspicion. The conversation was professional, focused on facts. Ethan posed precise, leading questions about recent incidents, thefts, disturbances, any oddities, unusual events, or the appearance of new suspicious individuals in town. He carefully monitored the sheriff's reactions, his facial expressions, gestures, intonations, catching any sign of unspoken information or anxiety related to something the sheriff wasn't voicing directly. Sheriff Brody was a good-natured man, a bit naive, and clearly overburdened by the routine affairs of a small frontier town. He spoke of a few minor break-ins, public disturbances mostly related to drunkenness at the saloon, and vagrants who regularly passed through town looking for work or shelter. He failed to grasp Ethan's subtle hints about unusual problems that went beyond ordinary crime. His world was simple and straightforward. Brody, with the readiness of a provincial official, provided Ethan with a list of individuals he considered suspicious. It consisted of the very same petty crooks, homeless men, or simply unwelcoming newcomers. But among these names, Ethan noted those who had settled in town relatively recently, within the last year or two, and were making visible efforts to blend into the local community, which in itself was a sure sign of a disguise. Systematizing all the gathered information, rumors from the saloon, data from the general store and livery, the sheriff's observations, and his own impressions, and drawing on his years of experience tracking unusual creatures, Ethan focused his search on these new faces who exhibited a desire for assimilation. He knew that monsters, especially those who didn't fully control their nature or lacked a permanent haven, rarely stayed in one place for long without leaving traces. Accidental displays of power, strange occurrences, unexplained events that attracted attention. His potential list of targets narrowed to a few individuals. A quiet, reclusive loner living on the outskirts, an odd merchant offering unusual wares, and someone who conversely was too perfect, too seamlessly integrated into the tranquil provincial life. It was this too perfect picture that aroused Ethan's greatest professional suspicions. Ethan began a methodical surveillance of these individuals. He studied their daily routes, where they went, when, whom they met. He noted their habits, times of waking and sleeping, places where they spent their time. He used natural cover, the shadows of buildings after sunset, dense thickets on the outskirts, folds in the terrain beyond the town. Before approaching an observation subject, he always carefully assessed the wind direction, so his own specific scent wouldn't reach the target and betray his presence. His movements were precise, calculated to the millimeter, almost silent, fluid, like a predator's. He operated like a professional stalker, merging with his surroundings, becoming virtually invisible. In the course of this scrupulous observation, he paid particular, intensified attention to Michael, one of the recent arrivals mentioned by the sheriff as suspicious. Michael was a model of propriety, the epitome of a virtuous citizen. He actively participated in community work, helped his neighbors, spent a great deal of time with his wife and children, and was utterly happy in his family circle. This overly flawless, too perfect picture paradoxically piqued Ethan's strong professional curiosity. Perfection always concealed something that was being carefully hidden from prying eyes. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of town and in the adjacent forest, things began to happen that were beyond the scope of ordinary provincial problems. Livestock started disappearing from farms located closer to the wooded area. Ethan, investigating the incident sites under the guise of a merely curious townsman or an experienced hunter looking for lost animal tracks, found prints on the ground, large, unusual impressions. He analyzed them with utmost care. These were not the ordinary tracks of a bear or wolf, though they resembled them in size. They were larger. The shape of the pads and toes was irregular, distorted, as if the paw had undergone a deformation. The claws left deep, unnaturally wide furrows in the soft earth, like furrows from a plow. The tracks indicated bipedal movement, short stretches where forepaw prints were absent or noticeably smaller and lighter. The creature only occasionally leaned on them. This was not the signature of a wolf-like werebeast, the type of lycanthrope he was commissioned to find. The target's description was different. This was something else. Something more ancient, more primal. His professional instinct, honed by years of encounters with the most diverse creatures of the shadow world, from stray vampires to swamp fiends, from minor gremlins to more dangerous entities, identified it as a cryptid. A creature not described in common hunters' bestiaries, a rare or mutated species of lycanthrope whose transformation was so profound that it had lost most of its human form and reason. This investigation confirmed his growing unease. Something resided in the forest, not directly connected to his target, Michael, but posing an uncontrolled, wild threat to the entire town and its inhabitants. At night, when the town sank into sleep, illuminated only by the dim glow of street lamps and the moon, Ethan remained awake. He would sit by his room window, watching the stars above the dark, dense line of the forest, or make quiet, cautious forays to the settlement's periphery, to the border between civilization and wilderness. His enhanced hearing picked up the usual forest sounds, the rustle of leaves in gusts of wind, the cries of night birds, the distant howl of coyotes, the creak of branches. But sometimes he heard something unusual, a heavy displacement of branches where no large animal should be, a distant, low, guttural growl that belonged to no animal he knew. His sense of smell detected something alien in the night air, a thick, earthy, bestial odor mixed with something sharp, almost chemical, like the scent of adrenaline and fresh blood. This smell sometimes drifted from the depths of the forest, sometimes closer. He felt a slight, almost imperceptible tension in the very fabric of reality around the town. Something alien, massive and dangerous was nearby, exerting an invisible pressure on the surrounding world, distorting the familiar flow of life. This uncertainty, this presence of something unknown, wild and uncontrollable, troubled him more than the routine execution of his commission to track and eliminate a specific target. His mission had suddenly become more complex and dangerous, demanding different approaches. In this quiet, seemingly southern town, something more, something older and more terrible than he had anticipated was hidden, and this something was awakening. Ethan spent long, intense hours over sketches and measurements of the tracks found at the sites of livestock attacks. In the silence of his small room, he spread sheets of thick paper on the table, carefully transferring the outlines of the prints, measured with a tape. He scrupulously measured their length, width, the distance between toes, the depth of the claw furrows. Then he compared this data with the extensive collection of drawings, photographs, and detailed descriptions of various creatures' tracks he had maintained for many years, a peculiar, gruesome bestiary compiled in the field. Known types of lycanthropy tracks, wolf, bear, even rarer feline ones he had encountered in his travels, had their characteristic features, their unique signatures. The tracks of large, ordinary predators, cougars, grizzly bears, large wolves, were also well known and easily recognizable to him. The conclusion he reached after a thorough analysis of every line, every indentation in the earth, was unequivocal. These tracks resembled nothing in his usual collection. He had never encountered anything like them before. The shape of the pads was too irregular, deformed, the claws too long, thick and blunt for any known type of wolf or even bear lycanthrope. Particularly alarming were the drag marks, indicating the creature moved a heavy, massive bulk, and clear signs of short sprints on its hind legs, leaving less distinct or absent forepaw prints. He identified it as a completely new, unknown species of cryptid, born of an ancient, primal mutation of known lycanthropy, which, in the process of transformation, had stripped the host of most of its human form, reason, and control. This investigation only confirmed his growing unease and premonitions. Something resided in the forest, not directly connected to his initial target, Michael, but posing an immense, uncontrollable threat to the entire town and its inhabitants, a threat ordinary people did not comprehend. He continued to observe his list of recent arrivals, paying particular heightened attention to Michael, the man who had integrated so well into town life. he saw him hunting with the local men. Michael moved quietly, confidently, shot accurately, read the ordinary tracks of deer and boar well, demonstrating the skills of an experienced tracker that also belonged to his lycanthropic nature, but were perfectly natural for a human. He saw him at a town meeting where improvement issues were discussed. Michael spoke confidently and calmly, expressing reasonable, well-founded ideas, his voice firm, his gaze clear. He saw him, with his wife and children, strolling down the main street, playing with little Lily and Tom on the lawn in front of their house. Michael demonstrated exceptional social adaptation. His behavior was impeccable. He was a genuinely loving husband and father. His interactions with his family were filled with tenderness, care, and patience. All these observations completely contradicted the image of a bloodthirsty, uncontrollable monster from the commission, described as a creature incapable of prolonged coexistence with humans without incident. Ethan, a professional hunter who had tracked monsters for years, admitted that his professional suspicions regarding Michael were weakening under the weight of what he saw. They were being replaced by more complex, unwelcome feelings, a human curiosity about this astonishing transformation and control, and even an involuntary sympathy for the man who had built such a life, despite who he was. Ethan spent his evenings in the saloon. He didn't abuse alcohol, maintaining clarity of mind, but ordered whiskey, sipping it slowly, and listened. The saloon was the town's nerve center, the place where gossip gathered, news was exchanged, and rumors were born and spread like wildfire. He learned about old scare stories concerning the forest, tales of lost people who were never found, strange sounds emanating from the thicket at night, fleeting, frightening shadows among the trees seen by travelers. He heard that several years ago, around the time, by his calculations, Michael had arrived in town, there had been a series of unexplained disappearances when people simply vanished without a trace in the vicinity. Ethan noted this fact. This was a time when Michael had not yet learned to fully control his bestial nature, a time when the curse would erupt. The townsfolk, sipping whiskey and beer, discussed the new livestock attacks. Their anxiety was growing, but for now their fear was rational, explainable. They blamed a large beast, an especially big rogue bear, or a particularly vicious old wolf that had lost its fear of humans. Pastor Elias, a man of deep faith, added a religious tinge to the growing fear, speaking of sins that had brought God's retribution upon the town in the form of a wild, bloodthirsty beast sent as a trial or punishment. Ben, a local hunter, a burly man with a loud voice and a penchant for exaggeration, boasted of his tracking and shooting skills, promising to quickly track down and kill any beast, clearly underestimating the true nature of the threat they faced. Ethan made regular forays into the forest, especially at dusk and dawn. He walked the perimeter of the town, gradually venturing deeper into the thicket, moving along barely visible trails and wild patches. He was not only looking for new tracks of the cryptid or its hunting grounds, but also assessing the forest itself as a sanctuary, its density, the ease with which one could hide, lie in wait, or conversely get lost, the presence of natural shelters, deep ravines, dense thickets of bushes, caves, or rock overhangs where a large creature avoiding detection might hide. He felt the pressure of wild, untouched nature, a primal force familiar to his own lycanthropic nature. But in this particular place it was alien, amplified and distorted by the presence of another, no less wild and dangerous creature. He found more mutilated carcasses, now not only livestock but also wild animals, deer, boar, even small bears. Their manner of death differed strikingly from the signature of an ordinary predator. The wounds were deep, ragged, with characteristic claw and teeth marks, speaking of incredible crushing strength and fury, unrelated to the need for food. This was killing for killing's sake, a manifestation of wild, uncontrolled power asserting its territory. The tension in town intensified with each passing day, like a slowly tightening noose. Rumors of the beast grew louder, embellished with horrifying details gleaned from the stories of surviving farmers and from fear-induced nightmares. And then, what Ethan had subconsciously been expecting with growing anxiety happened. The first human disappearance. It was a careless traveler heading to a neighboring town who did not return by the expected time and sent no word. Sheriff Brody, whose usual methods of investigation and search were powerless against this unknown threat, organized a search party of town volunteers. Ethan observed the group's assembly, their equipment, their determination mixed with obvious bewilderment and uncertainty in the face of the unknown. He joined the search briefly, moving along the flank to assess the actions of the authorities and townsfolk, to see their helplessness against a threat they neither understood nor could classify. Sheriff Brody, remembering the presence of a professional security consultant in town, a man with unusual tracking skills, turned to Ethan for help. He was an honest man and not afraid to admit his limitations and lack of experience in such matters. "This is something else, Mr. Blackwood," he said, his face expressing deep fatigue and growing concern. "Something we've never faced. My men are brave, but they're not trackers of that caliber, not used to this kind of game. We need someone with special skills, who understands how to move in the woods, how to read unusual tracks." Ethan accepted the offer without much hesitation. It gave him an official reason to participate in the hunt, to get closer to the cryptid, to study its behavior up close, and, most importantly, to observe all participants, including Michael, in a stressful situation where masks fall away and true natures are revealed under the pressure of fear and danger. The townsfolk began preparing for a large-scale hunt, a true monster hunt that would end their fears. They gathered weapons, rifles of various calibers, old revolvers, hunting knives, anything that could harm a large beast. They collected provisions, dressing materials, and prepared horses. Ethan readied his own equipment, his trusty Colt .45 caliber revolver, his reliable Winchester rifle. But he also had specialized gear, which he carefully concealed from prying eyes. Several dozen silver bullets he had cast himself, a set of sharp, balanced throwing knives, and reinforced leather gloves to protect against claws and teeth. He listened to the sheriff's plan discussions, quietly suggesting small but important adjustments based on his years of experience tracking creatures whose minds and behaviors differed from human ones. Michael, as the best local hunter and tracker, played a key role in organizing the group, demonstrating leadership qualities, knowledge of the terrain, and composure. Preparations were in full swing. The tension before entering the forest, before encountering the unknown, was palpable, electrifying the air. In the morning, as the sun just began to rise above the horizon, painting the sky in delicate pinks and golds, the hunting party, breathing heavily, moved into the forest. It consisted of Sheriff Brody, his face expressing grim determination,
Michael, walking ahead with the confidence of one who knew the terrain. Ben, loudly giving orders. Ethan, keeping slightly apart. And several dozen more men from the town, all who were capable of holding a weapon and possessed enough courage to face the unknown beast terrorizing their homes. The atmosphere was mixed, complex. In the air, there was a sense of resolve, a readiness to protect their homes, their families, but also nervousness, a hidden fear of the unknown, of a power that had already shown its brutality. Some men displayed ostentatious bravado, joking loudly or boasting, attempting to conceal their inner tension and trepidation. Ethan walked with the group, keeping slightly to the side, in the shadow of the trees, but observing everyone intently. His gaze constantly shifted from one face to another, assessing each man's state, their level of fear, determination, fatigue. He paid particular attention to Michael, who walked ahead with the sheriff, indicating direction, reading ordinary animal tracks, and making key decisions about the route.
Ethan sensed the forest's energy. His own senses were heightened to their limit, preparing for an encounter with something unusual, something whose presence he had already felt in the preceding days. The familiar scent of pine needles, damp earth, and decaying leaves mingled with the sharp odor of adrenaline, fear, and gunpowder from the assembled men, creating an unsettling cocktail. The hunt was difficult from the start. The beast did not leave a clear, easy-to-follow trail, as ordinary game would. It moved unusually, as if mocking the hunters, using difficult terrain, crossing small streams, climbing over fallen trees, making long, improbable leaps over bushes, and judging by barely perceptible signs, using the tree canopies for rapid, short-distance movement to throw them off its trail. It knew this forest, had used it as its refuge for a long time, and now used its knowledge of the terrain against the hunters, turning their advantage into a disadvantage. The groups of hunters, walking at some distance from each other to cover more territory, began to lose contact, getting lost in the forest's labyrinth. Men accustomed to tracking ordinary game, deer, bear, wolf, found themselves bewildered, encountering broken trails or false paths left by the beast. Ethan used his enhanced senses to detect barely perceptible signs that eluded ordinary trackers, even experienced ones like Ben or Michael in his human guise. The faint scent of the beast, carried by a weak gust of wind from an unexpected direction. A peculiar, unnatural crack of a branch heard from afar, as if from a heavy mass passing through the undergrowth. The strange behavior of forest animals, suddenly frightened birds, abruptly silent insects, the nervous scampering of small creatures. He subtly guided the group, suggesting they turn in a certain direction, investigate a particular ravine or dense thicket, explaining it as luck, a hunch, or simply years of hunting experience in the most remote and wild places. His suggestions always proved correct, which elicited surprise and growing respect from the sheriff and other hunters. And then, the beast attacked. Suddenly, from the shadow of dense thickets, where its presence had been utterly imperceptible until the last moment, where no sound, no scent betrayed it. The attack was incredibly fast, lightning swift, and absolutely brutal. The beast burst from the greenery like a knot of fury and claws, like a released spring. One of the hunters, walking slightly ahead of the main group, found himself in its path. He died first without even time to scream. His death was horrifying, a demonstration of inhuman strength. The body was torn apart with incredible force, bones broken, flesh mangled as if by a destructive machine, not a predator. This was not merely a predator hunting prey. It was the embodiment of pure, unbridled rage, an act of destruction. The death of their comrade, so swift and brutal, caused an instant shock within the group. Panic momentarily seized them all. Men recoiled, began firing chaotically, haphazardly, towards the fleeting shadow or rustling branches. Shots thundered in the forest, echoing off the trees, but the target, moving with incredible speed, proved too elusive, too fast. Ordinary lead bullets did little harm to the creature. They merely slowed or irritated it, eliciting a roar of fury, but not stopping its onslaught. Several hits, which Ethan clearly saw, failed to disable it. In this chaos of attack, as the group scattered, trying to dodge and find cover, Ethan and Michael found themselves side by side, instinctively covering each other. Their movements were coordinated without words, as if they were old comrades in arms. Michael displayed astonishing composure under the pressure of mortal danger. He didn't fire indiscriminately, but chose his moments, making accurate shots at the flitting monster, though even these did not inflict fatal harm. Ethan saw his determination to protect his comrades, his knowledge of hunting tactics even in such an utterly abnormal situation, his courage. They exchanged short, precise instructions based on intuition and experience. To the left. It's behind, by the big oak. An unspoken understanding arose between them, based on shared mortal danger and mutual effectiveness in combat. A kind of brotherhood forged in the heat of battle. Ethan, despite his inner knowledge of Michael's true nature, saw in him at that moment primarily a man, a reliable and brave companion. After the beast, having taken several hits and perhaps momentarily disoriented by the unexpected resistance, retreated briefly into the thickets, the hunters were able to regroup and retrieve the body of their fallen comrade. Grief and horror mingled with a determination to avenge him. Ethan, under the pretext of examining the damage inflicted by the beast to better understand its habits, conducted his own detailed analysis. The body was not merely torn, but mangled with some gruesome purpose, or in a fit of incredible unmotivated rage. The wounds did not resemble bear or wolf bites and scratches. They were deeper, wider, inflicted by incredibly sharp and durable claws. The structure of the damage, the locations of bites and tears, spoke of a force far exceeding any known animal, even the largest predator. Ethan understood. This was not just a predator emerging from the forest in search of food. This was a killing machine, created by nature or a curse to inflict maximum damage. This heightened his anxiety. What kind of cryptid was this? How dangerous was its proximity to his target, Michael? And what was Michael's own nature if he could control this entity within himself? While another creature of the same kind had turned into pure rage. The hunters were forced to make camp in the forest, as returning before nightfall was impossible, and leaving the wounded and the body of the deceased was unthinkable. The sun set, and night enveloped the thicket, now a place of horror and sorrow. The night was fraught with tension. The sounds of the forest, usually calming, now seemed threatening. Rustles in the bushes, the howl of wind in the branches, the cries of night birds, everything sounded alarming. The beast's approach was imagined in every sound. Around the campfire, to relieve tension and keep warm, the men shared stories. Stories of hunting, of life, anecdotes, memories of the fallen. Michael spoke of his family, of how much he enjoyed the quiet life in town, of his plans for the future. His words were sincere and warm. Ethan listened, noting the sincerity in his voice, the warmth with which he spoke of his wife and children. Michael touched on the subject of beasts, those that live in the forest, wild and dangerous, and those that, he said, live inside people, the dark side of human nature with which everyone must struggle. These words made Ethan inwardly flinch. He sensed that Michael perceived his own nature, saw something more than he allowed to show, felt a kinship in the darkness. Realizing that conventional methods of tracking and combat were ineffective against this cryptid, Ethan gradually began to increase his risk, relying more on his enhanced senses and reflexes, which he usually carefully concealed. He would accidentally notice movement in the dark that no one else saw, point to the direction from which a faint, unusual scent came, which others dismissed as forest miasma or swamp odor. He explained his unusual abilities as long years spent in the wilderness, where only such skills allow one to survive, heightened intuition, or a beast's sense. He walked a fine line, striving to be maximally effective against the threat while not revealing his true nature to those around him, especially Michael, whose perceptive eyes, he now suspected, saw more than he let on. The hunt was far from over, and the next encounter would be decisive. Morning brought not only a cold dew and mist coiling through the forest, but also a new resolve in the hunters, spurred by grief and anger. Following Ethan's directions, based on barely perceptible tracks, scents that only he could distinguish, and the strange behavior of birds, they found the beast's lair. It was a cave, its entrance artfully concealed behind dense thickets on the slope of a small ravine, practically invisible to an inexperienced eye. The tension before the final push was unbearable. It hung in the air, a thick, heavy layer pressing on their chests, making it difficult to breathe. Each step towards the cave entrance was deliberate, calculated, fraught with caution and readiness. The men's hands gripped their weapons tightly, ready for immediate use, fingers resting on triggers. And then the monster emerged, unexpectedly fast, as if flying out of the absolute darkness of the cave where it had hidden. Its first appearance was a shocking, heart-wrenching sight that would forever be seared into the memories of those who saw it. A tall, about 7-foot stooped, gaunt silhouette, covered in a tough, almost bark-like, nearly bony hide of an earthy, dirty gray color. A grotesque, elongated snout with numerous sharp, uneven teeth of various sizes jutting from its mouth resembled a distorted canine or wolfish muzzle, but was far more terrifying. Its eyes glowed with a dull, predatory sheen that reflected no light. Its limbs were long and powerful, ending in massive paws with incredibly sharp, dark, knife-like claws. This was not a human in beast form, like more familiar lycanthropes. This was a beast that only remotely, nightmarishly resembled a humanoid in its upright stance. Its movements were unnatural, jerky, angular, as if its body were assembled from mismatched parts, yet incredibly fast and powerful. Ethan instantly recognized it as an unknown lycanthrope, a creature cursed with lycanthropy but not belonging to the known, more human-like breeds of werebeasts. This was an older, wilder, distorted type, the product of a failed or incomplete transformation. The battle began. It bore no resemblance to an organized hunt or shootout. It was a chaotic, desperate, bloody confrontation. Ordinary rifles and revolvers loaded with lead bullets did not kill the beast with the first shot. It withstood hits to its torso, dark, thick blood spurting from the wounds, but it continued to move, as if merely shoved hard or bruised. The monster tore and bit with insane fury, flinging men aside with incredible ease, as if they were rag dolls, their bones snapping with a crunch. Cries of pain, horror, and desperation mingled with the monster's guttural roar and the thunder of gunshots echoing through the forest. Hunters fell one by one, succumbing to the terrible blows of claws and teeth without even time to reload. Ethan fought with cold, professional efficiency. His movements were faster and more precise than those of ordinary men, his reflexes honed to their limit. He shot, reloaded, moved, evading attacks, using every tree, every rock as cover. He made accurate shots to the beast's head and limbs, trying to slow it to inflict maximum damage. But even he, with all his experience and hidden abilities, understood that the forces were unequal. Conventional weapons were insufficiently effective against this primal force and vitality. At the height of the battle, when few hunters remained and the beast was only growing in fury, feeling no fatigue, Ethan found himself in a critical situation. In an attempt to distract the monster from the remaining men, giving them a chance to retreat or regroup, he cut himself off from the main group, becoming bait. The beast, sensing in Ethan something akin to its own nature, yet hostile and threatening, immediately chose him as its primary target. The monster moved towards Ethan with blinding speed, covering several yards in an instant. Ethan was cornered, pressed against a rock outcropping. His revolver was empty. His rifle lay a few feet away, dropped during a maneuver. The beast lunged at him for the final blow, its maw gaping, revealing rows of sharp, filthy teeth, its eyes burning with blind rage. Ethan had no time to think, no chance to reload or retreat. He made a conscious, instantaneous decision, a decision he had avoided for years, but which was his only chance of survival. He allowed the beast within him to emerge, not fully, not bringing the transformation to completion, retaining his human form, but enough to gain the necessary strength and speed. A sharp, agonizing surge of power coursed through him, as if every cell in his body were tearing from within. The muscles in his arms and legs instantly tensed beneath his clothes, becoming hard as steel or a taut rope. Bones shifted under his skin with a quiet, sickening crunch, changing the contours of his limbs, making them stronger and more resilient. His eyes flared with an inhuman bright golden light. His vision in the cave's dimness became sharp as day, seeing every detail in minute particulars. His hearing and sense of smell became incredibly acute, catching the slightest rustles, the scent of blood and the beast's adrenaline. This process of partial transformation was agonizing, every cell in his body screaming in pain and tension. But it was necessary. It was the price of survival. Thanks to this partial controlled transformation, Ethan managed to react. With incredible speed, unattainable by a human, he dodged the beast's lethal attack, slipping aside. His enhanced limb, momentarily stronger than a sledgehammer, delivered a powerful blow to the monster's side. The blow didn't kill, but it sent the beast staggering, temporarily unbalancing it and eliciting a piercing roar of pain and surprise. It was in this brief, vivid moment when his form was distorted and his eyes glowed golden in the dim light, that Michael saw him. Michael, who had been trying to break through the chaos of battle, risking his own life to come to Ethan's aid upon seeing his critical predicament. He saw not just a man heroically fighting a monster. He saw another lycanthrope, displaying his hidden power, albeit in an incomplete humanoid form. Michael's gaze met Ethan's, and in that instant, a silent understanding passed between them. It was at this critical juncture, with Ethan drawing all the beast's attention and in mortal peril, that Michael acted decisively, with the cool professionalism of one who knew the weaknesses of such creatures. Knowing the anatomy of beings he had encountered in the past, he fired an incredibly accurate shot from his rifle at a vulnerable spot. A joint articulation, a point where the hide was thinner, or some other vital area known only to those familiar with such cursed forms of life. The shot made the beast howl in pain and momentarily diverted its attention from Ethan. Using his own heightened physical strength, which he clearly kept under control, Michael lunged forward, drawing the monster's attention to himself, becoming the new target. Through the combined efforts of Ethan, who quickly recovered and grabbed his rifle, Michael and the remaining surviving hunters, who seeing the monster slowed, had recovered from their shock and regrouped. They managed to finish off the creature. Several precise shots to the head and chest, delivered almost at point-blank range, proved fatal. The cryptid's death was realistic and bloody. The monster collapsed to the ground, its enormous body going limp, dark, thick blood gushing from its wounds, quickly soaking into the earth. The battle was over, but for Ethan, everything was just beginning. The fight was over. A heavy, oppressive silence descended upon the blood-soaked patch of forest by the cave entrance. The sun had risen high, but its rays struggled to penetrate the dense tree canopy, illuminating a scene of destruction, death, and heroic, desperate struggle. The hunters, those few who had survived the unequal combat, began to count their losses, their voices quiet and mournful. Several men lay motionless, their bodies horrifically mutilated by the beast's claws and teeth, their eyes frozen in terror. Many were wounded, deep, bleeding gashes, torn wounds, bruises from the blows of massive paws. Scenes of mourning mingled with profound shock and the slowly dawning weak relief of knowing the immediate terrifying threat had passed, that the beast was dead. Ethan himself was wounded. Several deep, painful gashes from the beast's claws crossed his arm and side, the flesh torn. He felt a sharp pain throbbing in the wounds, but knew that wounds from a cryptid, especially one so wild and primal, were dangerous not just for blood loss. They carried some infection, or far worse, some other supernatural taint that would poison the blood or leave a mark on his own nature. And more importantly, at that moment, he felt his wounds healing with an unnatural, alarming speed, betraying his true nature to any observant eye. He immediately tried to conceal the extent of his injuries and, most importantly, the speed of their healing. Stepping aside under the pretext of checking his gear, dropping something and bending down, he quickly examined the wounds under the cover of his clothing. The edges of the flesh were already beginning to knit together, the bleeding slowing much faster than was possible for an ordinary human, as if hot mercury ran through his veins, sealing the vessels. He hastily but carefully bandaged the wounds using bandages from his medical kit. trying to do it so no one saw how quickly his body was recovering. His thoughts raced, outstripping his heartbeat. What exactly had Michael seen in that critical moment when he had to partially transform? How clearly had he seen it in the dust and chaos of battle? Had he recognized him? The return to town was steeped in ambivalent, contradictory emotions. The remaining townsfolk, men, women, children, came out to meet the hunters at the edge of town. Joy at the victory over the monster that had terrorized the vicinity and held everyone in fear mingled with deep, inconsolable grief for the fallen husbands, fathers, sons, brothers. The women's wails mixed with the men's heavy sighs. Michael and Ethan, as key participants in the final battle, wounded but surviving and having killed the beast, received words of gratitude and admiration from the sheriff and townsfolk. But Ethan also felt other gazes upon him, wary, questioning looks from those who had seen something strange in his movements or strength during the fight, or had heard about it from other survivors, those who had been close enough. On the faces of some, especially those closest to Ethan at the moment of his partial transformation, were questions they feared to ask, and growing suspicions. Despite his rapid internal healing, Ethan understood he needed rest and formal medical attention to avoid arousing unnecessary suspicion. He allowed the caring townsfolk to take him under their wing, agreeing to treatment in one of the houses where a temporary infirmary had been set up. Sarah, Michael's wife, who, along with other women, voluntarily helped with the wounded, tended to him, changing the bandages on his arms and side. This was a constant, grueling risk of exposure. He had to invent explanations for the unusual wounds, too deep for ordinary scratches, too neat as if made by a scalpel, and most importantly, healing too quickly despite their severity. He brushed off questions, attributing it all to a strong constitution, hunter's luck and superstitions, or simply the peculiarity of wounds inflicted by such an unusual beast, whose very nature affected the injuries. Every dressing change, every examination was a trial demanding maximum control over his body and emotions, utmost caution in every movement. Michael visited Ethan during his recovery. He brought food prepared by Sarah, inquired about his well-being, sat beside him, engaging in unhurried conversations. An unspoken, almost palpable tension hung between them, like a fine, taut string. Michael knew. Ethan felt it with his entire being. Michael knew he had seen something unnatural in Ethan, something beyond human capabilities. He didn't speak of it directly, didn't ask blunt questions, but his gaze was attentive, searching, at times penetrating to the very core. Ethan, in turn, didn't know exactly how much Michael had seen, how well he had understood it, and waited, trying not to betray himself by word, movement, or glance. Their conversations revolved around the hunt, the fallen comrades, the nature of the slain beast, seeming like ordinary chats between two men who had survived something terrible. But beneath the surface of these neutral topics simmered unvoiced questions, a mutual knowledge that each tried to conceal or not openly acknowledge. Michael sometimes uttered phrases that sounded like subtle hints, as if testing the waters, letting Ethan know he had seen. "That beast was strong, Blackwood," he would say, looking at Ethan with a long, steady gaze. "But you turned out to be a tough nut to crack. I saw how you dodged at the last moment. Amazing reaction for a man." Or, "I've never seen wounds like these before. They're healing fast. Imagine that. The beast must have been special." The body of the slain cryptid was brought to town and displayed for inspection in the main square, so everyone could witness its death and see the monster firsthand. Townsfolk examined it with horror and curiosity, making comments and cursing it. Ethan, under the guise of a hunter's and consultant's professional interest, gained an opportunity to conduct his own detailed examination of the corpse. He inspected the teeth, rows of sharp, uneven fangs capable of tearing flesh. He assessed the length, thickness, and strength of the claws. He studied the skeletal structure, which was more massive, dense, and robust than an ordinary animal's, capable of withstanding enormous loads. He felt the hide, tough and coarse, like the bark of an old tree, an excellent defense. He searched for signs of the curse, certain marks, anomalies in anatomy or tissue structure, characteristic of lycanthropes of various kinds. His examination confirmed it was a lycanthrope, but of a different, more ancient, more animalistic type. The creature was non-sentient, driven only by instinct, rage, and hunger, incapable of self-control, a pure embodiment of savagery and destruction, the complete opposite of Michael and Ethan, who, each in his own way, battled their bestial natures, trying to preserve remnants of humanity. The town gradually breathed a sigh of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted. The beast was slain. The direct threat to their lives and safety had passed. Life slowly began to return to normal. Children played in the streets again. Men returned to their chores and work. But for Ethan, the situation had only become more complicated, acquiring a painful moral dimension. He knew he had killed one monster, but his true target, the man he had been hired to kill, was alive. Moreover, this man had just saved his life at his own risk. Now Ethan knew something terrible about Michael's past, about his monstrous nature. Yet he also saw in him a man with a family, genuinely loving and loved, and he knew that Michael had seen his shadow, his hidden nature. The killing was no longer just the execution of a commission, a hunter's duty. It had become a complex moral choice, tearing him apart, questioning all his principles. As soon as Ethan felt he had recovered enough to move without visible signs of weakness and without raising questions about his too rapid healing, he made a decision. This was not merely a tactical or professional decision related to the investigation. It was a deeply personal, almost human duty to thank Michael for saving him. This step was important for himself, part of his internal struggle to preserve the remnants of humanity in his life, a life full of violence, loneliness, and the hunting of monsters. He headed towards Michael's house on the outskirts of town, knowing this would be the most difficult interrogation of his career, though he had no intention of asking questions directly. Simple presence, observation, silent interaction, that should be enough to understand. Sarah met him at the door, a young woman with a tired but kind face. Her smile was genuine. Her eyes shone with unfeigned kindness and warmth. She expressed sincere joy at his recovery, and once again thanked him earnestly for participating in the hunt, for saving the town. "Michael said we couldn't have done it without you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice soft and warm as sunlight. Michael's home was the epitome of coziness, safety, and normality, everything Ethan had been deprived of. The smell of fresh baking and roasted meat wafted from the kitchen. Muted children's laughter could be heard from the next room, sounds of play and gentle scolding. Ethan, accustomed to the harsh solitude of his wanderings, to the gloom of cheap hotel rooms and the shadows of night streets, felt alien in this atmosphere of warmth, security, and family happiness, as if he had stumbled into someone else's fragile world. He saw Sarah, her natural kindness, her obvious, selfless love for her husband and children, and understood how much Michael had built in this life, how much he valued this fragile idol, this island of normality in a world full of dangers. Ethan was invited to dinner. He hesitated for a moment, then accepted. Sitting at the same table with Michael, Sarah, little Lily, and Tom, it was a test of his self-control and professional detachment. The children were uninhibited and curious, as all children are. They asked him questions about the hunt, the forest, how scary the beast was, their eyes full of admiration and a touch of fear. Michael and Sarah behaved like loving, attentive parents, patiently answering the children's questions, correcting them when they forgot their manners or interrupted. Ethan watched them, saw the tender affection between the spouses, the mutual respect, the support in their gazes. He saw how Michael looked at Sarah, at the children, with love, pride, and, as Ethan now realized, with a faint shadow of fear, the fear of losing it all. This sight tore Ethan apart. This man, playing with his children, looking tenderly at his wife, sharing food. He was the very creature that, according to the commission, had once torn people limb from limb, killed without mercy. The contrast between the cold-blooded description of the target in the commission and the reality he saw before him was unbearable. It gnawed at his resolve. During dinner and the subsequent conversation in the living room, Ethan professionally but unobtrusively observed Michael. His gaze swept over Michael's face, his movements, the way he carried himself, searching for any signs of his hidden nature. A sudden flash of wildfire in his eyes, a nervous movement that would betray inner tension and restrained power, an unusual scent that his enhanced olfaction could detect even in human form, through the smells of the house and food. But he saw only a normal, kind man, slightly tired, but calm and confident. Michael maintained his composure, confident, without a shadow of anxiety or fear of exposure. He demonstrated exceptional self-control, as if the beast within were securely locked away. Ethan knew that such a level of control was itself a sign that the man possessed immense power, which he was forced to constantly suppress at great effort. After dinner, the men stepped out onto the porch to smoke a cigar or simply breathe the fresh air. The sun had set, and the air filled with the coolness of the approaching night, carrying the scents of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. The atmosphere became more serious, lighter, more suitable for a conversation between two men. At first, the talk was of neutral things: the weather, the upcoming harvest, the town's plans for next year, everyday concerns. Then they spoke of the fallen hunters, of the grief that had befallen their families, of the need to support the widows and orphans. Ethan noticed genuine sorrow on Michael's face, a sense of responsibility for what had happened, for not being able to save everyone. The tension between them mounted, becoming almost physically palpable in the night's stillness. The words that needed to be said, that had hung in the air since their return from the forest, hovered, ready to fall from their lips. Ethan felt he knew that Michael knew something, that his gaze, his calmness, it wasn't just an absence of suspicion, but a knowledge he was concealing, waiting for the right moment. He felt that Michael was grateful to him not only for help in hunting the cryptid, but for something else, more personal, connected to that moment by the cave. Michael, too, undoubtedly sensed something more in Ethan than just an experienced tracker and hunter. He sensed a kinship, a hidden power. The moon rose above the horizon, full and bright, shining with particular intensity in the cloudless sky, casting long, sharp, black shadows on the porch and yard, creating a play of light and shadow perfectly suited to their hidden natures. Ethan hesitated. He didn't know how to begin his interrogation, how to push Michael towards a confession without destroying the fragile normality he had just witnessed, without sowing fear and suspicion in Sarah and the children. He didn't want to hurt this family. At that moment, as Ethan pondered, choosing his words, Michael broke the silence, shattering the oppressive pause. He looked directly into Ethan's eyes, his gaze calm, yet tinged with the weariness and resolve of a man who had made a difficult, inevitable decision. His voice was quiet, so as not to be heard in the house, but firm, without a trace of fear or pleading. He uttered a phrase that brought Ethan's world, the world of his commission, his professional detachment, crashing down like a house of cards. "I know who you are, Shadow, and I know why you're here." Michael's words were a blow, not physical, but internal, stunning, capable of felling him. Ethan felt his professional mask, worn so long, so meticulously, stripped away in an instant, like a thin veil. There was no point in denying, no possibility of retreat or deceit. In his world, the world of beings living on the edge of human and beast, a world where secrets cost lives, the recognition of Shadow, a hunter of their kind, was tantamount to a death sentence for those who couldn't control their nature. He didn't deny his essence or his purpose. He simply asked, his voice low, even, devoid of visible emotion, but with a barely perceptible note of surprise. "How?" Michael explained calmly, unhurriedly, his voice sounding like the tale of a man long resigned to his fate. He had seen him in the forest, during the furious battle with the cryptid. He had seen the moment of partial transformation, the sudden flash of golden light in his eyes, the inhuman, incredible speed of movement, the unnatural, crushing force of the blow that had sent the monster reeling. In the chaos of battle, in the dimness of the cave, it had been fleeting. But Michael, being one of the changed himself, had recognized the signs. That was enough. His own nature, his deep, painful knowledge of the shadow world, the world of lycanthropes and other creatures, allowed him not just to see, but to identify Ethan as one of them, as one of the changed, possessing great power and control. And then, after returning to town, he had heard the rumors, the very same rumors Ethan had been gathering in the saloon. Old legends that circulated in certain circles, among those who had some contact with this world. Stories of a hunter who pursued their kind, of a man who always followed the trail of monsters, of a certain Shadow who caught up with those who lost control of their bestial essence. He pieced together what he had seen in the forest and heard in town. His conclusion was precise and left no room for doubt. Michael took a second step, a step that was even more shocking, more devastating for Ethan than the first admission. "I'm the one you're looking for, Shadow," he said, his gaze direct, honest, and devoid of fear. "I'm the shapeshifter you were commissioned to find." This was not a plea for mercy or an attempt to justify his past. It was a statement of fact, an acceptance of the inevitable he had long lived with and resigned himself to. Ethan felt a shock he had not anticipated, despite his initial suspicions almost dispelled by the picture of a calm, normal family life. His target, the object of his commission, the man he had been hired to kill. This was the same man who just days ago had saved his life in the forest, pulling him from the cryptid's sharp claws. The man whose family, a loving wife and innocent children, now slept a few yards away, in the warm, cozy house Ethan had just left. Michael began to tell his story, calmly, measuredly, with a heaviness in his voice, as if shrugging off an unbearable burden that had weighed on him for years. He told how he had received the curse, not by his own will, not out of a desire for power, but while hunting that very ancient lycanthrope, the cryptid they had just killed in the forest. It had happened many years ago, when he was a young, inexperienced hunter, too self-assured and careless, venturing deep into the woods alone. He described how he couldn't control the transformation in those early years, how the moon, strong emotions, fear, pain, anger, would rip the beast out against his will, turning him into an uncontrollable monster. The darkest part of his story, memories of horror and destruction. Michael described his past deeds, committed during uncontrolled transformations. Several years of wandering, uncontrolled outbursts. Killings. Mangled bodies of people who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Entire families destroyed in fits of bestial rage, which he later learned about from newspapers or rumors, coming to his senses after a transformation, covered in someone else's blood and not understanding what had happened. He made no excuses, sought no sympathy. He spoke of the unbearable pain he felt each time he realized what he had done, a pain worse than physical, of the nightmares that haunted him, waking and sleeping, of the guilt that gnawed at him from within. This is what had driven him to flee, to live in shadow, constantly moving, searching for a way to control himself, his anger, his fear, his bestial essence. Ethan listened, and Michael's every word was like a blow, confirming the terrible facts of the commission. This man truly was the monster described in the file, the target he was supposed to destroy. But then Michael moved on to another part of the story, his redemption and new life. He told how, through a long, agonizing process of struggling with himself, through constant training of will and mind using an ancient method of control he had learned from a wandering sage, he had managed to tame the beast within, to lock it away, and how this had only become truly possible after meeting Sarah and the birth of their children. He spoke of how their love, their innocence, their unconditional faith in him had become his anchor, his salvation, his reason for living, his primary motivation to fight the curse every day, every minute, every hour. He had built this life based on a lie about his true nature, but had sincerely repented for his past and dedicated himself to protecting those he loved. And now, his only goal was to protect this fragile idol at any cost, even the cost of his own life. Michael understood his duty, a duty to the world, to the memory of his victims. He knew Ethan was a hunter, and his mission was to destroy those like him, especially if they posed a potential threat. But he did not ask for mercy for himself, did not beg for his life. He asked for a place. "If you have to do this," he said, his gaze turning again to the lit windows of his home where his family slept, "please let's go into the forest, far from here. My children shouldn't see anything. They mustn't know who I really was." He didn't want his last memory for his family to be one of horror or violence, for them ever to learn the truth about his monstrous nature and his end. Michael mentioned with relief that the curse had not passed to his children. They were ordinary humans, a blessing or a fluke. This added another layer of tragedy to his story. He was protecting them from the world of monsters, of which he himself was a part, and from the hunter who now sat before him, ready to do his duty. The moment was taut with an unbearable tension. Time itself seemed to stop. Ethan was silent. His face, hidden in the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, expressed nothing, maintaining its impenetrability. But within him, a storm raged. Duty, gratitude, past, present, victims, family. Everything swirled into one unbearable knot of contradictions, tearing at his soul. Ethan uttered no word in response to Michael's plea. His silence, his slow, deliberate movement, he simply rose from the porch, accepting the challenge, was his answer. It signified agreement. It meant, "Yes, I will accept your challenge and go with you into the forest." He wasn't going to abandon the commission, his duty as a monster hunter, his code that defined his life. This was his life, his code, his inevitable struggle with the shadow world. But he had chosen how and where it would happen. Michael stood with him, his movements calm and resolute. No more words were spoken. Everything had been said in the silence. The two of them walked away from the house, leaving behind the sleeping town, lost in peaceful dreams, heading towards the dark line of the forest, now even more sinister and full of secrets under the bright spectral light of the full moon. The path into the forest was unbearably heavy, each step taken with enormous effort. Each of Ethan's steps was a movement through the minefield of his own morality, through his internal contradictions. He walked beside a man who, just days ago, had saved his life, risking his own, pulling him from the sharp claws of a monster. A man he had begun to respect for his strength of spirit, for his struggle with himself, for his attempt at redemption. A man who, despite his monstrous, bloody past, genuinely strove for a normal life, for the protection of his family, for peace. Ethan knew he had to kill him as a matter of duty. This thought poisoned every breath, made the air thick and cold despite the warm southern night. An icy knot clenched his heart. Ethan's internal struggle became increasingly evident through the thoughts that swarmed in his head, giving him no peace, like a flock of wild birds. He remembered Michael's victims, horrific details he had heard in stories, that he had read in old newspaper clippings tucked into his satchel, victims for whom he was obliged to pay by destroying the source of the threat. He remembered his commission. It was part of his code, part of his struggle to maintain the fragile balance between the world of humans and the world of monsters, to ensure that creatures did not emerge from the shadows. His job was to eliminate those who posed a danger, who did not control their bestial nature, who were a threat to the innocent. But he also remembered Michael in battle, his composure, his determination to protect his comrades, his humanity beyond transformation, the warmth of his gaze directed at his children. He remembered the moment Michael saved his life, when he was defenseless before the cryptid, his movements, his resolve. How could one kill one's savior? How could one destroy this new life, built on sincere repentance and deep love for family? He looked at Michael, walking beside him in the night silence like two shadows gliding along the forest path. He saw a strong, calm man. He felt his presence. An immense, suppressed, lycanthropic power still emanated from him, like a dormant volcano, but it was deeply subdued, locked away by willpower and that ancient method of control Michael had spoken of. Ethan pondered the nature of monsters. Was Michael a monster solely because of the curse flowing in his veins? Or had he chosen to be human, suppressing the beast, actively fighting his dark side? And if he had chosen humanity and managed to attain it, albeit at the cost of incredible effort, did Ethan have the right to take away that choice? That life, his family? He saw in Michael a distorted reflection of himself, a man who waged his own battle with an inner bestial nature every day, striving to maintain control, striving to remain human. They reached the appointed place, the very clearing in the forest bathed in moonlight, where just days before they had fought side by side against the cryptid. The clearing was open, without cover, emphasizing the hopelessness and inevitability of the situation. Here, under the gaze of the full moon, the ancient symbol of lycanthropy that had once ruled Michael and part of Ethan's nature, everything was to be decided. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Before the final confrontation, before shedding the last masks, Michael spoke again. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but full of sincere emotion. He spoke of his family, asked Ethan to tell them something if he killed him, to say that he loved them more than anything in the world, that he fought for them until the end. Or perhaps they simply stopped, looking at each other in complete silence, understanding that words were no longer needed, that everything most important had already been said. Michael's story, his confession, his plea for a place. Only action remained. The tension reached its peak. The air crackled with invisible energy. Moonlight enveloped their figures, making shadows long and distorted, lending the scene a surreal quality. Ethan prepared to make a choice that would determine not only Michael's life, but also his own future, his place in the world of hunters and monsters. His hand, as if of its own accord, reached for the butt of the revolver holstered at his belt. A familiar movement, part of a ritual.
His eyes, hidden in the shadow of his hat, felt a familiar tension, a precursor to the release of inner power, a readiness for transformation, for battle, should it begin. Michael stood opposite him, calm and focused, ready for anything. He had accepted his fate, his guilt, his redemption. He did not try to flee, did not beg for mercy. He was ready either to fight for his new life or to die, protecting his family's peace with his silence, his sacrifice. It was the culminating moment, the point of no return. A fraction of a second, frozen in the tension of the night forest under the gaze of the full moon. Ethan's hand hovered over his weapon, almost touching the cool steel grip of the revolver. He raised it slowly, smoothly, as if performing an ancient sacred ritual, each movement imbued with meaning. His gaze was fixed on Michael, standing a few feet away, illuminated by the moonlight. He took aim, not literally, but his body assumed a posture of readiness, his mind focused on the target, every muscle tensed, prepared for action. And at the very last moment, as his finger began to move, ready to squeeze the trigger, he lowered his hand. In his eyes, now visible in the bright moonlight, flickered a complex, agonizing gamut of emotions. The struggle between ruthless duty and awakened humanity, the pain of the decision made,
a glimmer of understanding and compassion, and finally, mercy. A rare, almost forgotten feeling in his life. He had made a choice. This choice was not rational from the perspective of his job, his code as a monster hunter. It was true to another part of his essence, the part that still clung to humanity, to notions of honor, gratitude, and redemption. Ethan spoke the words that defined this choice, putting an end to this chapter of their confrontation. His voice was low, almost a growl, but distinct in the absolute stillness of the night forest. It did not sound like forgiveness, more like a statement of fact, carrying immense weight in their world, the world of the changed. "You saved my life," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering from Michael, as if assessing his very soul. "Where even now, gratitude, a blood debt. Even in the world of monsters, a world where human life was valued little, and a monster's life even less, these concepts mattered. They were part of ancient, unwritten laws. This was the reason. A reason that allowed him not to kill, without completely violating his code, but merely postponing its execution due to another, more personal and binding duty, a debt to his savior. Ethan did not leave immediately. He turned towards the forest where he intended to disappear, to melt into the shadows, but he stopped. His voice dropped even lower, full of restrained power and a hidden threat, colder than the night air. It was not just a warning, it was a promise, a sentence deferred indefinitely that would hang over Michael for the rest of his life, like a sword of Damocles. "But this isn't forgiveness," he uttered, his silhouette part of the tree's shadows, a specter ready to return. "This isn't the end. I'll be watching." Each word landed heavily, like the toll of a bell, heralding the inevitable if a mistake was made. If you ever falter, if even one innocent life is harmed because of you again, if the beast takes hold. Ethan paused, letting the words sink into Michael's consciousness, letting him grasp the full gravity of the threat. "I'll be back. And then nothing will save you. Not your family, not your control, not your efforts." This was no empty threat. It was a promise Ethan would keep, regardless of distance or time. Michael now lived under a constant shadow. Michael stood motionless in the moonlit clearing, at first disbelieving what had happened, disbelieving he had been given a second chance. Relief washed over him in a wave, loosening the tension. He was alive. His family was safe. But immediately following the relief came a realization. The price of this salvation was enormous. This was not freedom. It was a lifelong probation, a constant burden. The price, a perpetual struggle, a constant fear of error, the knowledge that he was under surveillance, that his fate was now bound to this silent, deadly hunter. His peaceful existence, which he had built so long and arduously, now hung by a slender thread, held only by his own will and the shadow's vigilance. He understood that Ethan had given him a chance, but this chance was bought at the cost of a constant, invisible threat of retribution. Ethan vanished into the night, silently, just as he had arrived in this town. He didn't look back, offered no sign of farewell. His mission, his original commission, was unfulfilled. His hunter's code had been broken. Moreover, he was forever changed by this choice, a choice of mercy based not on rules but on the observation of a life. His path now lay in a different direction, with a new understanding of himself and his work. He was no longer merely an instrument, carrying out orders without thought. He had become a man making decisions based not only on a commission, but on what he saw, felt, and chose for himself. Michael remained alone in the clearing, amidst the shadows and moonlight. He watched the retreating shadow until it dissolved into the forest's darkness, becoming one with the gloom. Then he turned and walked back towards his home, towards his family, towards a life that would now forever be overshadowed by the knowledge that his past was not erased, only deferred, and that the shadow watched him, ready to return at any moment.